Thanks for listening to KATH 910 AM, Frisco, Dallas, Fort Worth on the Guadalupe Radio Network. Catholic radio for your soul in North Texas. Heard also on grnonline.com and on your smartphone.
Welcome to The Quest from the studios of the Guadalupe Radio Network. Join us as we journey together on this pilgrimage of faith. And now your host, Msgr Charles Pope.
And it is I, Msgr Pope, and I'm glad to join you today. And a lot of folks are down at the EWTN radio conference, so pray for them and hope they're having a lot of good networking and good new ideas and all kinds of fun stuff. So I've been there once before. It's always a great gathering of good souls. So today we're going to look at a number of things. We will look at the gospel or the readings anyway, for this coming weekend, and then some questions about holy days of obligation that came up recently in the news, and also about, well, let's just do a little bit of a question on synodality. There's a very interesting article in the Pillar this week about that, and then finally just a little look at Donald Trump at the Al Smith dinner. So joined today not by Matthew but by Sissel. How are you doing?
I'm doing very well, Monsignor. It's good to be with you.
Yeah, well, good. So I apologize to you and our listeners. My voice is a little, my asthma is kind of bad. I tend to cough, so if you hear a little of that or whatever, I apologize, okay? So enough said. All right, well, good.
It's a good time to say a prayer and pray for no coughs for the next hour.
All right, yeah, clear it up, Lord. All right, in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, amen. Lord, I do ask for good health. I also ask for your grace, and for all of us, for our listeners as well, that we can hear what you want to say to us today, and that I can just be the mule you ride on, you know. Make use of me, Lord, in your way. And we ask these things in Jesus' name, amen. All right. So, well, the gospel for this is the 28th Sunday coming up, and we have here, excuse me, actually that's going to be a little bit of the issue today, but we have here a gospel wherein we'll just say no cross, no crown. We'll call that this gospel, and the Lord is approached by John and James, and they come up to him and they said, Lord, grant us, grant that in your glory we may sit one at your right and the other at your left. Now, first of all, this is an inept question because Jesus has been teaching about how he has to suffer and die, and they're completely ignoring him, and now they're asking for places of glory at his honor, or places of honor next to him in glory. And he said, you haven't been listening, guys. But all that said, we see that they nevertheless asked this question. Now, as we have already seen, this is a misplaced priority. Their understanding of the place of honor is very worldly, isn't it? Huh? They want to be moved to the head of the table. They want the Lord to grant them a kind of an honor. Even in a worldly way of thinking, though, places of honor really need to be earned. And so their priorities are misplaced. They want the crown, but without the cross. And even, as I say, in this world, most people who gain places of honor have to do so after great effort. And there's a lot of sacrifices they're required to make to get to those places. So I would just basically say, first of all, this is what we would call a misplaced priority. And they're completely ignoring everything Jesus is saying to them already, that the Son of Man is not your typical, not your average Messiah, who was going to come on a war horse and beat up the Romans and institute a great kingdom of David and build a palace, and they're going to have places in the palace. That's what they're thinking. And he's trying to disabuse them of this notion, but you might just say that they're pretty stubborn with it. No, I'm not stubborn. I know none of you are stubborn, but they were certainly stubborn. So we see here, this gospel opens up with that understanding of a kind of misplaced priority. Now, then comes the question of the major price. So the Lord says, you don't know what you're asking. Can you drink from the cup that I drink of, or be baptized with the baptism of which I am baptized? At some point you have to wonder, was Jesus astonished at the request, or was he just amused, or was he sad? It's not easy to say, but the bottom line is clear, right? They had absolutely no idea what they were asking. Jesus says as much. And neither do we usually have any idea what we're asking when we ask things of God. So often, we want blessings, we want honor, seats in high places, we want this or that thing. But we give little thought to the crosses that are necessary both to get there and to stay there, Those who finally do attain to leadership often know what a cross leadership is, It can be pretty lonely. There are many pressures. And often there are many long hours, and there's heavy weight of responsibility, and most leaders know that also the consistent sting of criticism and isolation. So the Lord's only reminding them of them and also to us of the monumental price. You want places of honor and places of leadership and all these things. Listen, you have no idea what you're asking for half the time. Be careful what you ask for. You might get it. I think it was Einstein who said, I always hated authority, and so the Lord responded with a good sense of humor by making me an authority. And so all of these are ways of saying that there's a lot of things which we often forget. I can only say, even just as a lowly pastor, sometimes the burden of so many things in leadership, and there is the sting of criticism from time to time, and these sorts of things, and it's not as peachy. That corner office is a place to go and have a headache, So all of these are ways of saying that the Lord is reminding them of the price of this crown they seek. Now then comes finally, though, the medicinal prescription. Look, he says, they say, oh yeah, we can endure the cross or the cup of suffering you're going to drink. He says, well, all right, it's yours. but to sit at my right or my left is not mine to give. It's for those to whom it's been prepared. Now, when the other 10 heard this, they also became indignant at James and John. So the other apostles also joined in the inept response by becoming indignant that James and John are trying to get special dibs on the seats of honor that they want. And so, again, all of these are, ways of saying that their indignity simply shows that they don't have any idea that what the Lord is talking about in saying He's going to be going to the cross. So the Lord tries to bring this picture of the cross down to earth, and He says, basically, look, He says, the greatest in the kingdom of heaven is the servant, even the slave of all. Is this straightforward enough? You see, it's not those who sit at the head of the table, not even those that are sitting at the foot of the table, not anyone with a place at the table. The greatest in that banquet are those who serve the table. And, you're looking in the wrong direction for places of honor in my kingdom. My kingdom has special honor reserved for those who love, who serve, who sacrifice, who die so that others can live, who take hardships so that others don't have to carry them, who carry burdens, and who make sacrifices, who are humble, who are lowly. These are the greatest in the kingdom. And so, do they get it? No, probably not. Neither do we. It takes most of us a lifetime before we finally get it through our thick skulls. That the point of life is not to have a corner office with a view. We often think more of bank accounts and prestigious addresses, of square footage in our homes, all that kind of stuff. Big salaries, big impressive titles like Monsignor, but not of service. But we had to probably be on our deathbed before we finally realize that the most valuable people in our own life are those who change our bandages or help us and take care of us in our final days. These are the greatest, you see. To serve is the greatest. Jesus said, you've seen how those who have authority among the Gentiles lord it over them. Their great ones make their authority felt. It cannot be that way with you. The ones among you who want to be the greatest will be the servant of all. You see how I came among you, he says. He says, you call me rabbi, teacher, master, and Lord, for so I am. But you see, I have come among you as one who serves. For the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve and give his life for many. And so this then is what it means to imitate Christ. This is the heart of greatness. So the greatest ones in our life aren't necessarily those ones who had the big salaries. They're the ones who take good care of us. And if we would be great, the greatest ones, we would also then be the servant, even or the so-called the slave of all. So this is one of those gospels of the what we call paradox. Paradox meaning this, that it's against the contrary way of thinking, the common way of thinking things. It's contrary to that. And we want to learn to accept the fact that very often, the way the world thinks is not the way the Lord thinks. My ways are not your ways, says the Lord. My thoughts are not your thoughts. As high as the heavens are above the earth, so high are my thoughts above your thoughts, and my ways above your ways. Now, is this just some way of just sort of disrespecting the rich or the powerful? Look, somebody has to be in charge. Someone does have to lead, and all of us at some point usually attain to some role of leadership. So this is not to denigrate those in leadership, but rather to say to them what makes their leadership great, even when you're in leadership, is the idea that I'm not here to lord it over. I'm not their master. I'm their servant. I'm here to help coordinate and make things come together so that people can use their gifts and people can grow and develop talents, and good leaders train leaders to come behind them, you see? These are the things that good leaders do. So we all attain at some point, once we reach some age, that we have some form of leadership. So beware of these things. The Lord isn't saying no leadership for you. You're just down there in the galley serving the meal. But at some point, if you do go to leadership, remember, there's a lot of suffering that comes with leadership. And there ought to be, because you're the first one, if you're in leadership, who's called to make sacrifices for those you serve. And you do serve those who you call subordinates. You don't lord it over them. All right, when we come back, we're going to talk a little bit about a question that was raised recently about holy days.
It was somewhat of an accident, and I have a lot of windshield time driving for work, and usually I'm listening to my gospel music, and so I wanted to find something else different, and so I started scrolling. I found Guadalupe Radio. I started listening to it on a regular basis, and what I realized, had I found this station years ago, my conversion would have probably happened years ago.
The Guadalupe Radio Network, radio for your soul.
Adam Bly here, along with Debbie Georgiani, co-hosts of The Spirit World.
It's time for our October Open Forum show on The Spirit World.
October is chock full of saint commemorations. It's dedicated to the Holy Rosary, and because of Halloween, even the secular culture is thinking about spirits, both holy and otherwise.
So this is the perfect time for you to call in with your questions about angels, demons, saints, or anything in between. Listen this Saturday morning starting at 10 a.m. Central, 11 a.m. Eastern.
Welcome back to The Quest, an extraordinary journey where every step brings us closer to discovering God's love for us. Want to join the conversation? Give us a call at 877-757-9424.
All right, we're back, and we have an interesting topic that's come up. It's covered over at The Pillar. On October 17th, you can find the article. Vatican letter settles but raises questions about the U.S. Mass obligations. For holy days, the so-called holy days of obligation, our bishops have a rule that's about as clear as mud to a lot of people, that sometimes these obligations are there, sometimes they're not. It just depends. And I don't know, Sister, you may have heard this. Before. If the trumpet sounds an uncertain call, who will muster for battle? That's actually a quote from St. Paul. Do you have any initial thoughts about how you as a layperson experience holy days of obligation, just in terms of whether you're supposed to go or not?
Sure. I think there is sometimes a little bit of confusion because it depends on, some areas of the world, like which days are holy days. And I don't think, especially at least in America, I don't think we put as much emphasis on them. as maybe we could. Just like the whole portion, not just going to Mass, but also just recognizing on that day that it's, I benefit from working from a great Catholic organization where we take holy days off. So there's absolutely nothing stopping me from going to Mass, even when maybe in my local diocese it may or may not be. The holy day could have been moved to the weekend. But I think that there's sometimes it seems like we talk about holy days, but then I think it's a little underwhelming, maybe, the obligation.
Yeah. And I think sometimes, too, I guess as a priest, does it oblige this year or not? And it gets very complicated, like January 1st. Anyway, it's all very complicated and very murky at times. Basically, if a holy day occurs on a Saturday or a Monday, it usually doesn't oblige, but sometimes it does. If it's December 8th, for example, which is the patronal feast of this country. But on the other hand, as I say, is it that horrible to ask people to go to Mass 2 days in a row? Heaven forfend. I mean, we just have such low standards, I guess, but also I think low expectations of God's people. Anyway, well, let's get into the issue here, the story. Standing USCC, the bishop's policy has, since 1992, talked about, when feast occurred on a Saturday or a Monday, the precept to attend Mass was abrogated. All right. If a holy day of obligation, it occurs on those days, then it's waived. Anyway, Bishop Paprocki wrote, though, to the dicastery in Rome for the interpretation of law, and apparently there was some disagreement among some of the leaderships of the bishops, between the bishops and the canon law bishops as well as the liturgical bishops at the USCCB. Their own Ordo says this year, since the Immaculate Conception, the Feast of the Immaculate Conception is transferred to a Monday from the second Sunday of Advent, it says it's not a holy day of obligation. Well, their own norms would seem to indicate actually it still is, because December 8th always is, even if it's moved to Monday. Anyway, there was debate back and forth, and it was just listed that way as it was. So he wrote to Rome, and Rome then provided an answer. They said, well, this is your problem because our universal law doesn't provide all these exceptions, and it says here, the prospective inconvenience of attending Mass on a second successive day or the ordinary difficulties of attending Mass during the work week are not usually held by canonical commentators to meet the canonical standards of a grave reason, to set aside the obligation. The congregation points out that, nobody holds that if something's impossible, a person's obliged to do it, so that in this case it's automatically set aside, the norm. There's no dispensation needed in a case like that when one simply cannot get to Mass. But at any rate, so basically they remanded the question back to the American bishops and said, look, this is your mess. You fix it up. They don't foresee all these standing exceptions as a normal thing. So I think we're back to what I'd like to know from some of our listeners, 877-757-9424, again, 877-757-9424. I think two problems occur to me. First of all, it's confusing at times. Okay, it's like the Feast of the Assumption, but it's on a Saturday, so I don't have to go to Mass. But next year, it's on a Tuesday, so I do. Now, either the Feast of the Assumption is important, or it isn't, seems to me. And if it's important, we ought to go to Mass. If it's not, well, then skip it. No, I don't mean skip it entirely, but you see the point. It's just odd to me. I think people sniff and smell legalism when they know when they can find it. This is legalism. This is not. Either this is important and we should do it, or it isn't. But except the fact that it occurs on a Monday or a Saturday it doesn't make it intrinsically any more or less important. So I think somewhere in there we've lost our way. Now, Again, I think we have this, situation where no one's going to follow this uncertain trumpet. So, as you might expect, I know this will shock you, Sissel, but attendance at holy days of obligation has plummeted nationwide, where many Catholics used to fill our churches on holy days. Let's say the numbers are exceptionally poor these days. Thank God some still do come, but it gets convoluted, and people do, I think, hear legalism, either this is important or it isn't. Just because it occurs this way or that way. If there's a snowstorm or whatever, we all know that there's the obligation to attend Mass is set aside. Or if a person absolutely can't get out of work or whatever, these things would be, exceptions. But to exempt an entire group of people just because going to Mass 2 days in a row is too big of a burden. Oh, gosh. Now, there's another expression you've ever heard before. A camel is a horse designed by a committee. Did you hear that?
I think I have heard that one.
Yeah, right.
That's pretty great.
I think that's actually how this came about. I remember when the bishops were voting on the holy days, back in, I think it was 1992, there was an election. I mean, they made an election. They made a vote, and they did vote to keep all the holy days and not to worry about Saturdays and Mondays and just keep them as they were. It was a close vote, but it was a winning vote for that side. Well, there were 3 or 4 bishops who weren't present and who submitted absentee ballots a little bit later. And all of a sudden, we found out 2 weeks later that when the final tally was made, it looks like we are going to move to this new system, that the bishops who were present and debated it voted against it by a narrow margin, but they voted against it. So even the bishops, I think, were quite divided at that time, and what we have now is a mess. Another problem we have is I don't know if it's a problem, but it's I don't care for it myself. We take important feast days like remember Ascension Thursday. The word Ascension Thursday always went together. Well, not anymore. Most of the dioceses say, "Oh, that's too inconvenient to ask people to come out on a Thursday, so we'll just transfer it to the nearest Sunday." Same with Corpus Christi. Corpus Christi used to always occur on a Thursday, Gosh, what are we saying to people? It's the same thing I think we had a problem with when we had COVID. Liquor stores had to stay open because they were essential, but churches had to be closed. People get the message. This isn't that important. They're going to kind of toy around with it and mess with it, and it obliges some years, the holy days, back to the holy days, and other years it doesn't oblige, and all of these kinds of things. So ultimately, I think what we ended up with was, again, a camel is a horse designed by a committee. The current holy day policy, convoluted as it is, so much so that for example, a lot of priests that I've asked, do you know that even January 1st, the Solemnity of Mary, Mother of God, which is also New Year's Day, it's always January 1st, some years it's not a holy day of obligation, and some it is? No, I didn't. Yeah, even that one, you'd figure the church would want everybody at Mass on New Year's Day, even though that's sort of a secular holiday. It was always considered part of the Christmas octave and the whole cycle of feast, but it's no longer. So some years, if it occurs on a Saturday or a Monday, they're not obliged to go. If it's on a Tuesday or other day, well, you got to go. And all of these are ways of saying that it drives a lot of priests crazy, trying to get all this stuff figured out, especially in the middle of the Christmas cycle. And people don't know, and they ask, and the priest scratches his head, and he has to go and look it up. And so even pastors don't have all this down. It's complicated and confusing at times. And so again, back to where we began, who will follow an uncertain trumpet? I think somewhere we have to learn in the church that clarity is very important when you're teaching. And I know that not everything is digital in life. Everything is not just, everything. There's going to be a range of things when you're teaching. But at the end of the day, whenever we can be, just being clear is very important. I know that one of the struggles we certainly had with our good Holy Father is he's not always clear. He says things and makes you scratch your head. What do you mean by that? And those kinds of things. And so therefore I think we have to be in our teaching authority, and especially when we're going to make requirements of the faithful or abrogate requirements, that we be very clear as to what that's about and why. And I don't think we are. I'll give you another example in the church. We permitted cremation some years ago. Some years ago, I forget when it was, the church permitted cremation, but you couldn't have a funeral mass. And then they finally said, oh, well, let them have a funeral mass too. Okay, but we although we permitted cremation, we never really taught. And so you get all kind of crazy stuff going on today, where people are throwing ashes here, and they're not even ashes. We should stop calling them ashes. I just caught myself. They're not ashes. They're called cremains. They are what remains of the body after it's subject to this burning or this fire. These are fragments, small fragments of bone and other tissue, but it's not ashes. Okay, so this is collected and put in a container. This is what remains of the human body. So in effect, this is the remains of a human person, the mortal remains. Now, it should be treated in the same way a body is. Now, let's just take an intact corpse. You wouldn't say, well, I want Uncle Joe's right arm and left leg. But people say, well, I want a third of the ashes to go here and a third of the ashes. We don't know. We're not to divide up the cremains. We're to bury them intact or put them in a mausoleum intact. Burial is permitted, but intact. You don't throw the remains out into the wind. This is not what we do. And likewise, the most ideal situation is to have them in a Catholic cemetery, either in a mausoleum or buried. But this is not often happening today. And I tell you, I've talked to different dioceses, different bishops. None of them seem to be very motivated to teach clearly on this. And so a lowly pastor like, well, Father Pope's a fuss budget. Just go over here to the other priest and he'll take care of you. So you end up with some pastors are strict and others are not. I personally think that we should probably be at the point where we're not going to schedule a funeral mass where there's cremation until a burial has been arranged for. I think it should be part of it. It's all part of the rite. In fact, if you look at the rite of Christian burial, it starts out with the sign of the cross at the greeting of the body at the church, and it doesn't end till the cemetery, the final sign of the cross. This is considered one liturgy. So I've drifted from holy days to cremation, but the principle is that a lack of clarity in the teaching, it creates all kinds of strange, weird things and head scratching, and people being just dismissive of things like holy days, or the questions about burial and cremation and how all this stuff works together. And it doesn't take that much to just clarify and teach these things, I think, more clearly. Same thing could be said for the Friday abstinence. Total mess right now. Okay, when we come back, we'll have another topic. We're going to talk a little bit about the question of synodality, and as the synod is beginning to wrap up.
This is Life News Radio. I'm Jim Anderson. An insider to the Bush White House says the failing struggle to win over Catholic voters may doom Kamala Harris's chance of carrying the key swing state of Pennsylvania, where 30% of voters identify as Catholic. Besides her obvious abortion problem, a Wall Street Journal article points to her history of hostility towards Catholics in court briefs against the Little Sisters of the Poor or openly opposing Catholic nominees to federal courts. One oddsmaker says Donald Trump has a 58% chance of victory. With 10 states facing unlimited abortion ballot measures, Florida has opened over 100 investigations into potentially fraudulent signatures that supported unlimited abortion on November's ballot. Dead people signing, signatures of pro-life activists, and signatures not matching state records are involved. 2 of the paid signature gatherers have previous convictions involving election fraud. This is Life News Radio. Think about the trouble we're in this culture. Then imagine for a moment that your ancestors examined the public record of whether you voted or not. Imagine what history might say about these times, and then think what it might mean to those future generations to discover that you had nothing to say about the future they live in. Without even faith or ethics, you can see why voting is a moral obligation. Vote for a culture of life. The Tennessee case against a White House embrace of Title X abortion funding just got a boost from pro-life religious and medical groups. At stake are right of conscience violations in the Biden-Harris reinterpretation of Title X rules, reinterpretation that violates federal law banning abortion funding. Title X funding is still problematic for its promotion of contraceptive family planning, especially targeting the poor. For pro-life headlines delivered to your email address daily, sign up at lifenews.com. This has been Life News Radio.
You're listening to The Quest, a pilgrimage of faith. Have a question or something to share? Call the show live at 877-757-9424.
All right, so we're back, and I have another article here from The Pillar written by J.D. Flynn regarding the Synod. Among the topics, he says, for discussion at the Synod on synodality this week are ways in which the Church can be both authentically hierarchical and make use of synodality for better governance and ecclesial life. Now, just to identify a couple terms there, the Church is hierarchical, which means there's a hierarchy in the Church. Now, literally, by the way, hierarchy, hierus plus archon. Hierus means priest and archon means rule. So the Lord Jesus set up the divine constitution of the Church is hierarchical. Chapter 3 of Lumen Gentium of Vatican II says the Church is hierarchical. There's rule by priest. In other words, Pope, bishops, and the priest in union with him. With the bishops. So all of these are ways of saying that there's a divine constitution of the Church that's hierarchical. But the question about synodality is: does the Church benefit from consulting at all levels? And generally, at the Synod, there's been widespread agreement on that on that question, namely that ecclesiastical institutions, within the Church, would benefit from a greater commitment to prayerful, open consultation ahead of decision making. All right. Now, this is not matters of settled dogma. We shouldn't keep discussing things that have been taught definitively. Okay, they've been taught definitively. That's a closed matter, but perhaps in other matters, And I think most people in the modern world, at least the modern Western world, think that consultation has an important role and should be used wherever possible. All right. I'm pretty much in agreement with that. Again, so long as we don't put those consultations on a doctrinal level, the doctrinal level can only come with the bishops in union with the Pope promulgating doctrines. All right. So let's be careful, but I get the main point. Now, some think in the Synod, if you poll them, that synodality represents now a major sea change for the Church. This is change forever, the way the Church will do business. Others are more convinced that synodality is a faddish buzzword. I'm probably more in that camp. But all that said, a deeper question, though, is all this talk about synodalities, does it amount to rules for thee, but not for me? Both from the Vatican curial offices and also from the Pope himself. And that's what J.D. Flynn ponders in this article. There are some who think that this is a lot of the curial offices are not very consultative, never have been, and continue not to be. Some, on the other hand, are. All right. But here's a quote from the document, the article from J.D. Flynn. But while the Synod on Synodality is the Vatican's forward face, many bishops say that the reality of actually working with the Apostolic See has become less consultative in recent years. Now, for example, major documents on policy and practice were promulgated in the past after extensive consultation. That was in the past. But in recent years, a number of things have come out, like Fiducia Supplicans, Traditionis Custodes, and a few other documents on climate change and so on, with very little forewarning and little involvement with the bishops and their diocesan conferences. In the case of Traditionis Custodes, the bishops were left scrambling to keep up with theological principles emphasized in that text, and were pressured very quickly by Archbishop Roche in Rome to implement something that came out of the blue. There was some chatter about it, but there was no details, there was no widespread consultation. there was a sense that the Vatican said they'd made this consultation, but there were no American bishops who could admit that they had been personally consulted. So again, these are the things that are being said in this this article. In the case of Fiducia Supplicans, which was that whole blessing of so-called gay unions and so on, the Vatican's failure to consult bishops' conferences led to a very embarrassing and public pushback from African bishops and others who felt, again, they'd never been consulted and that this was just not acceptable in their part of the world. Even the rollout of Amoris Laetitia, which was the document, a synodal document to be sure, but it on marriage and family, but it buried the prospect of a very major shift in pastoral practice in canonical norms into a footnote. And it left a lot of bishops' conferences interpreting it differently and scrambling to understand it. And different conferences had competing interpretations and so on. And a kind of a guessing game we were left with. So too often, the Vatican Diplomatics Office has been shut out of the drafting process for a major text on environment. Two of them that the Pope issued in the last year and a couple years before that. These things have important effects in nations, especially the third world. It's one thing to say, well, you can't, burn coal or oil or whatever, but at the end of the day, that's not always an easy option in some parts of the third world. All right. Overall, curial sources tell the Pillar that they've experienced a decline in trust between dicasteries in recent years and observed the Pope's propensity to work only with small, often shifting group of close advisors. There are times when we don't even know what's going on with things that touch on our own departments, one staffer told the Pillar. So again, there's a kind of a public face of synodality. Let's all talk and bring everybody in on the conversation, and let's move and talk about these things and talk some more and talk and get everybody's voice heard. And yes, we'll have to make some final documents and decisions, but everyone should be heard and so on. But this doesn't seem to be what is actually going on inside the curial offices among themselves, or the way they experience some documents coming out from the Pope's office. And certainly, I'm going to just say it plain, this is a very top-down papacy. The Pope has been very authoritarian at times. And if that's not fair, then I apologize. But I think that that's the experience, whether it's a fair accusation, but that the Pope has been very authoritarian. I particularly felt horrible about how he treated people I know and love regarding the Latin Mass. And some of that's been attributed not so much to him, but to Cardinal Roche. And there's some chatter that Cardinal Roche is kind of on the outs because the Pope felt he held the whole thing or implemented it far too sternly. I don't know. I don't know how to sort all this out. But I just know people I know and love felt very crushed and felt very, we don't want you. Everyone else should come. We should go out to the peripheries and welcome everybody else. But if you want the Latin Mass, you're not welcome. Go away. And it wasn't as though they were asking to do something very strange, like marry animals or do some strange, odd thing. They just wanted the right to celebrate the Mass the way the saints had experienced it for almost 1,500 years. And it's a very odd church that we're in today. And it's very hard to sort all of this out. And so I would simply say that's kind of, at the end of the day, the nature of this article from J.D. Flynn, with some additions from my own here. But rules for thee, but not for me. My own thought is I've tried myself. I try my best to be consultative. If there's decision to be made in the parish and so on about important things, clearly we try to include the lay people. There are some things that I'm actually required. Like, let's say I want to spend a large amount of money to put air conditioning in a certain building where I had to go to the parish council. I can't just act on my own. I have to go to them and consult with them and say, well, here's what I think it'll cost, and do you think this is a good expenditure of money? It's their money. It's not mine. And so I'm actually canonically required to consult with financial things. But even in terms of pastoral things, I think it doesn't make sense, for example, for a priest, let's say, who goes into a parish, he said, this parish is too liberal, and I'm going to put in Gregorian chant, and, okay, well, Father, maybe you'd want to get to know them a little and talk to them, and maybe set up one Mass. You don't have to put it at all the Masses, and see how it flourishes. But at some level, I'm very, very comfortable with a church that, as a general norm, is consultative. To use the word synodal today, synodal. I don't think my spell checker thinks there is such a word. But anyway, there is a value in that, generally speaking. I don't think we should be having long discussions about things that are doctrinally determined. Let's have a discussion about whether Jesus is divine. Well, no, that's not a discussion worth having, and the fact that we're even having it sort of casts doubt on the whole thing. So no. But the question of women priests, that has been doctrinally decided by the church, and I don't think having long conversations about it, well, there's no point in that. But if we're talking about, again, various, other things in the church that are still open for discussion, I think it's a perfectly fine thing to do. I just wish that some of these things were more the case, say, with the Latin Mass, or, again, we all know, and I think the Vatican is rightfully, apologetic might be a strong word, but they were rightfully made aware that they shouldn't have made a major shift in the way we look at blessings and so on their own like that. This isn't really something that belonged there. Now, the Pope took something else off the table, which I think he should have, which is women in the diaconate. I don't think that's something that right now we can discuss. I don't think it's possible. I will say that it doesn't have the same certitude as women in the priesthood, but I do think that it's pretty well determined that this isn't something that the church is able to do. But if there are further discussions, they should be limited and very carefully doctrinally overseen, not just chatty kind of synodal sessions where people just, of various different ecclesiastical ranks and training kick these things around. I think it really belongs with liturgical, canonical, and experts, along with, good church historians and so on, who are really qualified to have an intelligent discussion about this. That would be, I think, a discussion, if there were going to be ongoing discussions, where it should take place. Just everybody talking about anything isn't always a productive use of time. So, again, I don't know, what do you think, Cicely? You're on the parish council. Do you have any roles in your parish where you're sort of telling that pastor what he needs to hear?
I'm not on the parish council. I do run my parish's college and young adult ministry, so I do have some, correlate. I have a very good relationship with our pastor, but I'm not normally the one to be, unless I'm saying, hey, can we please do this with the young adults? And I think this is something that's really good and important for whatever the ministry that I'm helping with.
Well, I'll be honest with you. I've had young adult ministers here in the parish who've had to tell me, this is not recently, maybe a few years back, Father, you keep asking people to put something in the collection basket or write a check, but people my age, we don't write checks and we don't carry cash. You need to provide another way for us to contribute, even if live right there in the church. And so the QR codes and different things or things the way people can scan or give electronically. And so that would be an example, Father, the priest gets feedback, from people who know. And that's kind of, I think, probably the role of a young adult leader in a parish,
Sure.
And, yeah, there might be I think some other things, that it's funny how I got old. I didn't notice it right away. I kind of didn't know it yet. But for example, I was 40 years old before I ever had a cell phone, and that wasn't normal. I mean, I was probably 39 or 38 before I ever had an email. But that was normal. I mean, these things we think have been around forever have not been around that long. But they have been around for a lot longer in the lifetime of many people who are, say, 40 years and younger. They've always been around. But older guys like me remember a time when these most basic things didn't exist. So we don't think as clearly as we should. And that's where I think certainly parish councils and things can work with the pastor to be effective in getting people to be able to be involved and sign up and be part of something, and so on. But yeah, as I say, those are things for all of us to ponder. But anyway, the synod on synodality is kind of wrapping up, and again, I personally think that we won't be using words like synod and synodality 30 years from now. But I think it has its role, but we've just called it what we used to call it: conversation, consultation, those normal words. Okay. Well, listen, when we come back, we're going to talk a little bit about the dinner yesterday, the Al Smith dinner, and some reaction to that.
This is Franciscan Media's Saint of the Day for October 18th. Today we celebrate St. Luke. As familiar as we are with the name of today's saint, we know little about the man. A Gentile Christian, his 2-volume work shows the parallel between the life of Jesus and that of the Church. Luke's Gospel was probably written between 70 and 85 A.D. In it, he emphasizes Jesus' compassion and patience with sinners and the suffering, stressing that Jesus died for Jews and Gentiles alike. Little people figure prominently in Luke's writings. He makes a point of showing Jesus at prayer before every important step of his ministry, and he portrays the joy of salvation that permeated the early church. Tradition holds Luke to be a native of Antioch, and Paul calls him our beloved physician. He appears in Acts of the Apostles during Paul's second journey to Philippi, accompanies Paul to Jerusalem, and remains near him when he is imprisoned in Caesarea. During those years, he had time to seek information and interview persons who had known Jesus. His writings reveal an expertise in classical Greek style along with knowledge of Jewish sources. Mentioned in St. Paul's letters to the Colossians, Philemon, and Timothy, Luke died probably around the year 84. There's more about the saints along with inspiration and Catholic resources at our website, saintoftheday.org. From Franciscan Media, this has been Saint of the Day.
This is The Quest from the studios of the Guadalupe Radio Network. Share the show with a friend. You can find us on social media. Want to listen again? We're on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you enjoy listening to podcasts.
All right, well, most of us are aware that the Al Smith dinner took place yesterday, and it's an annual thing, but it's especially prominent every 4 years with the presidential election. You usually have both candidates, and Kamala Harris, for reasons of her own, decided not to come. She did submit, as most of you know, a kind of an odd video. I saw it, I didn't quite understand it at all. I don't even think the I don't even think the MC could make much out of it either. It was unusual. But the fact is, she wasn't there. There wasn't a major presence of her there, despite the video. She sort of phoned it in, so to speak. But anyway, I have to tell you, Cecil, I don't know if you've seen these types of dinners before. They used to be a lot more common. They were sometimes called roast, where people, they used a kind of humor that I personally don't care for, kind of cringe at. It's a form of humor that calls to attention people's quirks and things about them that are a little embarrassing and sometimes just outright true. So, for example, Donald Trump noted the presence of the mayor of New York, who, by the way, is under indictment. He says, "I hope you get off, man." I mean, and we're having a good laugh about the mayor of New York being under indictment for some pretty serious charges. And anyway, but we have a, this is the way these are done. I think that the MC did a great job. I think we should leave comedians, comedy to the experts, to the comedians. I think Donald Trump trying to be funny, he was a little okay, but I mean, it wasn't really, he's not at his best, there. And, but back and forth it went. And the main thing was they raised a lot of money for the poor and the needy. What I find interesting, though, and I thought it was particularly worth repeating, was that particular crowd, mainly Catholics, but there were a good number of non-Catholics there. But basically donors to Catholic charities, New York's Catholic charities. Were there. I would say that if you were to take a survey of those crowds that go to the Al Smith dinner, at least these days, be about 70% liberal and about 30% maybe traditional or conservatives, politically conservative, that is. And you would think that that the vice president would have been very comfortable there, but she wasn't. I think we have to accept the fact, though, too, that she's been very. She's had a hard time dealing with us Catholics. Let's put it that way. And during the Senate hearings for Kavanaugh and others, she said, that Knights of Columbus organization is pretty radical. Really? Radical? The Knights of Columbus? You mean the ones like, yeah. She tried to pass laws when she was, in California, or enforce laws against the Little Sisters of the Poor and other Catholic organizations, forcing them to give abortion referrals and all sorts of things like that. So she's definitely, in her own political background and her work as a California Attorney General and all those different things, she's done a lot of things that were definitely targeting Catholics. So there could be some of that. But as I say, I'm surprised. I'm very surprised she didn't go, and I think she is paying politically for it. It certainly hasn't helped. It didn't help to create her. It didn't help to create, her image of being, being able to laugh and have a good time. She comes across at times somewhat angry and dour, and she does have that laugh, but it's not a joyful laugh. It's more of a nervous laugh, But all of that said, the guy from Saturday Night Live, Gaffigan, what's his first name? I don't know if you might remember. But anyway, he's from Saturday Night Live, and he was very funny. I think he did a lot of good mixing of the crowd and kind of disrespecting. I'm putting that in quotes, but disrespecting both sides, telling jokes on both sides. He was very, very good. And at times, I thought Donald Trump was a little bit. I was wincing a little bit too self-serving at times. So all that said, a number of things here, though, in the Catholic article here, in the Catholic vote article, that are significant here. It's the last Democrat that didn't attend was Walter Mondale. He lost 49 states and he won one. It shows you there's a God, Trump quipped. Catholics, you got to vote for me, Trump said later in his speech. You have to remember, I'm here and she's not. And all of these things. All polls are indicating I'm leading with the Catholic vote, Trump pointed out, as I should be. And again, there's just some of those things that make me cringe when he talks like that. There's no humility in the man. And as much as I think that there's a lot of agreement with his policies, there's a lot of, I understand why people struggle to like Donald Trump. I don't take him too seriously. Well, and again, I want to be careful how I put this. Let's see. He's not that. There's a lot of people from New York who kind of talk like that. It's kind of a shtick, hey, come on, what you doing? It's kind of a in your face and kind of a braggadocious sort of New York, Queens, New York kind of approach to life that he has. That just comes from having grown up in that kind of a setting. But he gets along and he kind of has a good time with people of all different backgrounds, and he's able to do that. He says here regarding Mayor Adams, he said, good luck with everything. Trump told Mayor Adams, who was recently indicted on corruption charges, he says, they went after you, Mayor, 9.5, because you went after, the immigration. And once again, definitely bringing politics into it. You can't avoid politics at the Al Smith dinner, but you need to do it, I think, with a little finesse in a way that makes it a kind of a light fare. And it didn't come across that way sometimes. That would be my sense. And nevertheless, he was there. and she wasn't. Overall, a lot of people said they were very happy with the dinner, and they did raise a lot of money. And he kept shaming some of the people there to give more. So I think Trump did what he was asked to do, and for all these reasons, I think it's a very it was a good evening. For the president, but also just for the Catholic Church. There's respect there, and a reminder that Catholics are an important part of the vote, and there's a lot of us in this country. And even if we don't stick together and a lot of us don't go to church, there's something there that needs to be respected. And I don't know how much longer that's going to last, but I will say that I think it's still a very important thing. Now, finally, he had a little bit of an interview with Arroyo. Before you could have also seen on, I think it was on Fox News. No, I'm sorry, on Fox News as well as EWTN. Arroyo says he noticed Trump has been making a lot of several supportive overtures towards Catholics on social media. You're playing the Ave Maria. You're posting "Happy Birthday to Mary." You're posting the Saint Michael prayer to ward off evil. Is that telling voters something about your spiritual journey? What is it? No, I don't think so, Trump answered. It's just beautiful to me. I just look at the whole thing, the words and the pictures. The pictures are so beautiful. So when Arroyo asked Trump to clarify his stance on abortion, the 45th president said that I'm like Ronald Reagan before me. The exceptions are very important to me, the life of the mother, rape, and incest. I wish it were that simple. I think he's got other views on this for example, the heartbeat bills and some of the things he said were too early. So I think it's a little more complicated than that, Mr. President Trump. I would have to say I want to see you come a lot further than you have on that. But all I can say is that he is who he is, and it was a good evening for him, I think. And I also think it was unfortunate that the other candidate wasn't there, but that's for her to have to deal with now. We are an important part of this country, we Catholics. We remain so, even if at times I'm not sure we deserve to be so, because we're so vague. But let's like all of you listeners and I, let's get clear about being Catholic again, and make being Catholic something to be respected, not just politically, but religiously and morally. May Almighty God bless you all, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen.